So good morning, and welcome to those joining us through the webcast. I think the creativity of our group of retreatants must be expressing itself in other ways, because we're not getting a flood of haikus. Or maybe they're shy to present them. But there's one quite remarkable one here, which is in Irish and English, and has the same number of syllables in each version. So the haiku version. So would you?
It was actually accidental.
It was accidental. Would you like to read it? Come so that they can.
All right, okay.
They can put a face to the voice. There we are. And what's your name? Is sorry.
Noreen.
Noreen. Okay.
Okay, I'll read the Irish version first because I was inspired to write this in Irish as I was walking back to where I'm staying. And it was a lovely sunny morning. So it's Solas na Grania, Los Crumkin is Sourkin, Dapwi na Koska. And the English translation is the light of the sun on daffodil and primrose, colour of Easter.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you very much.
And just a little bit of poetic license, because if you translate the last line, Dapwi na Koska, it actually is yellow colour of Easter in Irish. So I need to put that in to get the 5 syllables of the Irish version. But when I translated the English, I couldn't do that. So you can either say for the last line, colour of Easter or yellow.
Yellow Easter. Shows Irish as a more versatile poetic language. Good. Thank you very much. So, Holy Saturday. It's a strange day, neither fish nor fowl, in the liturgical season, or the liturgical time, in the sense that it's we don't celebrate Holy Saturday really, I suppose. We live it, we wait, we go through it. It's that space of time after a big event, whether it's a wedding or a funeral or a baptism or some large event that we've been waiting for or anticipating, and afterwards there is this aftermath, the silence of the morning after. But it's an important day because it contains in its silence, it's above all a silent day, it contains many of those connections that I have been talking about, which build up to our sense of meaning. Meaning, we see this in somebody who is dying. If they have the experience of meaning, they can die with joy and with peace. And meaning essentially means a feeling of connection, a sense of being in touch with or connected with. First of all, I suppose, ourselves, our own past, our own character, self-acceptance is the basic connection, without which really no other connections can begin to happen. And then we need more than that. We're not self-sufficient. Just being connected to ourselves doesn't give us enough meaning to get through life. In fact, it would even give us a sense of a lack of meaning if we felt we were only connected to ourselves. At times we prefer, like Marlene Dietrich, just to be alone, leave me alone. But if we remain in that state of insulation, isolation, we are robbed of the essential meaning that makes life joyful and livable. And so the sense of connection to ourselves inevitably, naturally expands and flowers into connection with others, into our relationships. And our relationships become, in a real sense, the sacred ground of our lives for this reason, because they themselves open up. We are more than just our own relationships. Those are essential to our identity and to our purpose in life, but to our vocation in life. But we are more than that even. And eventually this connectedness, this field of connectedness expands beyond the horizon of our perception, and we experience connection with God. So the experience of meaning is the experience of being connected. And of course there are good connections and bad connections. I think those of you watching this retreat on the webcast have generally responded that you've been getting a good connection. But a bad connection would be where with either a digital connection or a personal connection, it seems to come and go. It comes on, it goes off. So the ideal, of course, in all connections, in all relationships, is to establish a smooth consistency, a flow, an even flow of communication, of respect, of reverence. And it's when we can develop these good relationships, these good connections in our lives, in all of these spheres, that we begin to see the great healing that is taking place. We'll first of all perhaps be aware of changes in ourselves, which may be, it seems at first, minor changes in our personality, in our level of happiness or our level of appreciation of beauty. But we will become aware also of a deeper, all of this arising from a deeper healing of the primal disconnection, that primal sin, that primal flaw that has lurked there in the story of Easter that we've been exploring these last few days. This primal disconnection that we see, for example, manifested in the sad and dark figure of Judas, the one who is disconnected. And that sad and dark reality has to be acknowledged, has to be brought out into the open for it to be healed. This full experience of connection, so this being flooded with meaning, is very much what we mean perhaps by a mystical experience or a true experience of God. This can come in many shapes and sizes. It can come instantaneously, knock us off our horse on the road to Damascus, or it can sort of seep into us over an extended period of time, so that when we look back over a period of time, we can see a change happening or has happened, and we have become aware of it not just in the instant, but in the process. We'll come back to this idea of process in a minute. So this experience of meaning, this experience of God, does not happen, or very rarely happens, instantaneously, because it isn't really just an experience, in the same way as we might have the experience of heat or cold or pleasure or pain within the moment. It's not just an experience that fades in time and gets replaced by the next experience, but it's more of an awakening, a process, the stages of awakening, or the upgrading of our whole capacity for experience. Perhaps that is what we are as a person. We looked at the beginning of this retreat at the great sort of primal question of identity, of who we are. And it's this question of who we are that is the guiding theme of our own story. And perhaps who we are is this capacity for experience, for new for deeper, for consistent, but at the same time for progressive experience. So in the face of this reality, which is not such a subtle reality, if we realize, when we realize that actually this is how we are, this is how we operate, this determines how we feel and how we relate to people, events, to ourselves. What about our natural impatience? If Holy Saturday is this feast of patience, how does it reflect upon our natural impatience? The impatience of the mind. The mind is very quick. The mind is quick to anticipate, to create new scenarios, possible ways in which things can turn out. We do this when we plan our lives, or we plan for the next 24 hours. The mind is naturally capable of anticipating, of moving beyond the present, but of course it can only do that in imagination. It's a great gift of the imagination, but it's limited to the realm of image, of potential, rather than reality. So the mind can imagine what's going to happen next, but it then gets impatient because it hasn't happened yet. If I can see it, why isn't it here? Our technological society has increased our natural impatience because it has given us so many more tools and mechanisms for imagining or recording or playing with our image of reality. And because we can simulate reality so much, the real world often seems less interesting or less responsive than our digital world. This is something that anyone interested in the education of children, which really should be everyone, should be very sensitive to and very aware of. These are wonderful tools we have to stimulate our awareness of reality, but they are also very dangerous tools because they are naturally addictive and seductive, and they can easily simulate reality rather than stimulate it. So the impatience of the mind, in the end, simply has to accept the limitations of the imagination. We just have to accept that the body takes a certain time to do certain processes. There's due process in nature. And it's when we become submissive to that, or at least attuned to that, that we begin to shed the stress, the anxiety, the sort of neuralgia of our impatience, and to recover peace and calm. I think that's why we all feel when you get out of a big city, which is always rushing, always impatient, and you go for a walk, even in a park or in the country, that's what happens. You de-stress because you're surrounded by natural processes and the beauty of those natural processes, and that has an immediate effect, just as the island has had, I think, on us who have been here for this retreat. The environment in which we make a retreat is very important. And here we are on a little island of great beauty, surrounded by the sea or the bay, and the weather, which has been very friendly this week, and all of which we have just to accept, and to accept it in its own way, its own pace. We can't change the mountains. We could take a picture of them and do a photo shop edit on them, but we can't change the mountain. We can't change the mood of the sea. We can't change the temperature of the air. These are things we just adapt to. And the great Irish spiritual poetry is very much about this interaction with, rather like the poem that Noreen made. It's about accepting and enjoying, in fact, the reality of the natural world. So even though we can imagine and anticipate the results of something, we can't go there in reality except by going through the stages necessary to get there. Meditation might be seen, and I think is seen by some people, as a kind of speeding up of the process. And it may be seen as a kind, and it is often taught as a technique or as a tool which will give you a desired result quickly and effortlessly, or relatively effortlessly. But is that really what meditation is? Is it an expression of our impatience? Or is it about actually finding ourselves moving at the same rate as the real world in which we inhabit, and not wasting time, which is what we normally do when we get impatient. When we get impatient, we make mistakes, we repeat ourselves, we crash the car, we delete a document. We make mistakes normally when we get impatient. But when we are patient, we find the best speed at which the process that we are involved in can unfold. So we don't waste time, but we can't speed up the process. And I think meditation, rather than being just a new technology which enables us to get peace or get rid of our cholesterol or get God more quickly, meditation needs to be understood, and if we don't understand it in this way, we may be much less likely to persevere with it, to complete the process. It needs to be understood as an acceptance and submission of our impatient mind to the natural process, to nature, to our own nature and the way our world, our own inner world, relates to the outer world. A process is a series of events that lead to a certain goal. We are living in a temporal universe. The universe, although it's still expanding, is also headed for the great contraction. At least that's what the scientists say, and it makes spiritual sense. In the same way, our lives, ourselves, are little universes of meaning and that are continually, or can be continually expanding until the very end, but we are definitely going to come to an end. So we can continue to grow until the end, up to the very end. And indeed, as we've seen several times, the last stages of the process may be most magnificent, most interesting. It's certainly what many people who've written about the transformation they've gone through in the last year or weeks or months of their lives have said, that they have seen, known, learned something in their last illness, for example, that made all the suffering that they went through worthwhile. So, in the same way, the account of the death, of the life and death of Jesus gives quite a lot of prominence to those last hours of his life, in which we could see, we might say, we see the pure person, the pure distillation of everything that he was, into the way in which he died. We use this idea of process in everything, just because that is the way things are in biology or psychology, in business, information theory, in science, in manufacturing processes, in financial agreements. We talk about the process of law, usually very slow, in philosophy and in music. Things take time. And there are, for a good job to be done, precise steps by which we get there. And we need to be mindful, to be attentive of each step, because if we try to skip a step, we blur it, or we, in fact, mess up the whole process altogether. So, time is a process moving in a particular direction, although it seems to, at the same time, have this mysterious ability to repeat itself. For us, I think, for the ancient world, they saw time primarily as cyclical. We see time primarily as directional. It's like an arrow. An arrow doesn't go around in circles. Boomerang does, but not as an arrow. An arrow goes in a particular direction. So time is about development. It's about this process. It's about formation and progress and growth and evolution and flowering. On Holy Saturday, we dive into the matrix of this human process as we learn to understand the meaning and the connectedness of waiting itself. So today is the day really where we can think about and get attuned to the actual process of that we call waiting. So it's the day of patience. Jesus is out of sight, not out of mind, but he's gone deeper than our tracking system can follow, like the plane lost somewhere in the Indian Ocean. The disciples at the time no longer feared what was going to happen because it had happened. And they didn't fear the worst, they knew the worst. And so it seems from the accounts we have that they were sort of paralyzed with fear. They were just broken. It was like after the loss of someone you love and after the funeral, you don't have the energy, really, to think about getting on with life again. Somebody sent me a message the other day about some children who were writing things about Easter, and one little girl wrote a little message to Jesus. Dear Jesus, hope you are well and enjoy your new life. So we're not quite there yet. We can't imagine even, and the disciples couldn't imagine if there was going to be a new life. This was really in the very. They were really in the very heart of the matrix. He'd left them with something that seemed to have been interrupted, a process that seemed to have failed. They must have sensed this, because it certainly looked that way. everything he had, they thought, promised them, everything they had hoped for, had not happened. It was just a failed presidential election. You know, it must be pretty terrible to spend 3 years of your life trying to, you know, thinking and breathing nothing except getting elected, and then you don't get elected, and you're just one of those forgotten, failed candidates. So he had left them, it seemed, with this feeling of a process that had been meaningless. And we've all, I hope, had that experience at some point, because it's a very educative experience of really feeling and seeing that everything you've worked for has failed. Right, you know, and when you see things in that way, and maybe there may be good reasons for seeing it, if something had collapsed or around you, then there isn't really a rational or logical way of getting out of that perception. During that time, you just need friends to help you. But this seems to be where the disciples were left, with this feeling of just actually disconnection from him, from everything they'd hoped for, from any sense of meaning. The work that he had asked them to join in and to follow him for was all totally smashed and lost. So imagine you've been working on something, a program, for years, or a project, and then everything just collapsed. Perhaps they were blaming him in one part of themselves, but they were almost inevitably blaming themselves for having left him to suffer his fate alone. They couldn't have felt very good about that. So the time of waiting within a process is going to contain moments of despair, or moments of meaninglessness, moments where you can see and feel nothing except disconnection. And if you haven't gone through those dark nights, it's unlikely that you can bring the process or the project which you are involved in to completion. In the same way, as we can't become fully human, we can't fully develop our capacity for faith and love unless we go through these chasms of meaning, these dark places. So meditation, especially if we've been doing it beforehand, before these Holy Saturdays or these Good Fridays happen, meditation can hold us in there, in that time of waiting. That's why it is such a good investment to work now while the sun is shining. You know, build the roof. Repair the roof while the sun is shining, which is what the Irish economy failed to do, and most of the other economies of the Western world. Pay off your debts and get the house in good shape while you've got good weather. In the same way, we learn in relatively ordinary time, and things are just going ahead quietly without great dramas. We learn the discipline of the regular practice, and as we learn it, we learn what a gift it is to have that regular practice in our daily lives. And then when the crash comes, which it does periodically, maybe we also avoid a few crashes by having this daily practice, because we're more mindful and we're more patient. We don't skip the stages necessary for ordinary processes of living, relationships, jobs we're doing. We learn to accept the process, so we probably reduce the number of crashes and conflicts and mess-ups in our lives, but some will come, inevitably. And when they do, we will have the stability of this daily practice, which has now become part of our life. And even on the worst day, we will say, well, I've got to meditate now. So meditation teaches us how to wait, to let go of the self-accusation that we direct against ourselves, on the one hand, or on the other, the blaming of others for when things go wrong. That's usually how we deal with difficulties. We either blame ourselves or we blame others, or a mixture of the two. Privately we blame ourselves, publicly we blame others. What we learn in meditation actually promotes the recovery of the balance that we've lost. We learn the great acceptance of reality as it is. The blaming of ourselves or others, the attribution of blame in this way may often be a way of evading dealing with the urgent reality that is there. Whereas in meditation, we don't waste time in blame, but we accept responsibility and we withdraw our projections, the way we project blame onto other people. This is deeply liberating, but of course it's also uncomfortable because we have to face ourselves. We have to give up the indulgence of either blaming ourselves or blaming others, and this can be turbulent at times because these are habits of mind and emotions that we've got into. We see ourselves in a particular way as a victim or as whatever it may be, and we see others as people getting in our way or people undermining us or our oppressors. It's in this active waiting, therefore, where this withdrawal of projections and this acceptance of self and acceptance of responsibility happens, that originality is born, creativity happens, authenticity comes into being. Because this process of waiting, this active waiting, this almost passionate waiting really, connects us to our own uniqueness, connects us to the real moment we're in and to our own unique perspective, our own unique relationship to it. No one sees the world quite as you see it. We've each got a unique perspective. We each of us add something to the world which is unique. Put all these ways, all these perspectives together, and you come close to imagining the mind of Christ. But our way of expressing what we see, the unique way we see things, is the gift of self that each of us is meant to make. Ultimately, our meaning, all of this connectedness, happens so that we can achieve this gift of self, love, the act of love. And this is, I think, how we can today understand that leap that Jesus took at the beginning of this week into the series of events, into the process that we call his passion, which led to his death, and clearly from the text to the offering of himself on the cross, the laying down of himself. Simone Weil, great French mystic and philosopher of the last century, who was often called the patron saint of outsiders, so a kind of patron saint of human uniqueness, was also had a profound insight into the art of waiting, and was something of a master of this art of waiting. She thought that all sins are attempts to fill the void. In other words, say for example on Holy Saturday, we could fill the void. I mean, we're preparing for the liturgy this evening and so on, preparing for the trip back home tomorrow. But this is a rare opportunity in liturgical time to really sort of float in the void, in this emptiness between the death and the rising. And it's something we enter into imaginatively, but it's a sacred imagination that brings us into it if we can hold it. So to fill the void is a very natural reaction. Nature abhors a vacuum. So whenever we see spare time or an empty space, we usually, without thinking, imagine how we will fill it. All sins are attempts to fill the void. If we go down into ourselves, she says, we find that we possess exactly what we desire. If we go down into ourselves, we discover that we possess already exactly what we desire. Well, there's no better description, or shorter description really, of what waiting is about. Patience, this waiting, is not stagnation, it's not passivity. It is electrified, it's brought alive and made vital by attention. Meditation teaches us that, to live attentively, open to all the potential that is there. Simone Weil has a great expression, the suppression of doubt is tyranny. The suppression of doubt is tyranny. And to be open to all potential means we have to live with doubt. We have to live with the possibility that the whole of the story we've been speaking about this week is maybe just kind of not so important after all. Just a historical story that sort of caught people's imagination, but the whole thing is it's just a story and nothing else. It doesn't really involve me. So accept that. Accept that doubt. So don't suppress it, but also don't be suppressed by it. The attentive waiting that we are invited to practice will not be frightened of a doubt like that, but will be open to the greater reality, to the potential surrounding it. So the process that really has brought us here together this week, apart from the Holy Week itself, and which we have been developing together in our meditation times is meditation itself. It's a journey of deepening patience, which does help us to realize that we do possess what we most deeply desire. And this brings us strangely closer to our goal, much closer than if we're trying to rush or to control the process. The only thing we can control is our practice. One of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, apart from patience, is self-control. So it's self-control we need to build up a little in order to develop the discipline, the daily practice. So we can't control the outcome, we can't control the process, but we can control our practice, the discipline. The process itself is grace. Resurrection is not an inevitable consequence of the finality of death. In the way the scriptures speak about resurrection, it is natural, but it is triggered by grace. So let's take our time for meditation now, and then we can have some time for reflection together afterwards. Let's take a couple of moments to prepare.